Before we get into this episode, I wanted to introduce one of the partners for the show, Move Pre-Workout. I've been using this over the last year and can massively see the benefit with all my training. And I thought I'd invite Tom along, who was involved in the formulation.
Cheers, Mark. Obviously delighted to be supporting the podcast. And so Move Pre-Workout, we've got a strength-based formula, but this one is specifically designed for endurance athletes. And it's one of the first of its kind. We're just focusing on really high quality ingredients that are going to benefit endurance performance of any kind. So yeah, we're really excited by the product and delighted to be supporting podcasts like yourself.
Oh, it's amazing. And this is something that you are specifically taking before your training, before your rides, to be in best possible shape. I'd encourage you to give it a try. Go to movepreworkout.com and for a 20% discount, put the word endurance in at checkout. On with the show. Well, warm welcome back to the Endurance Podcast. And we are recording live at the Adventure Travel Show in Islington, London. It's now the middle of the day. I know you'll be listening to it and watching it in the future, but it's always exciting capturing these conversations in the real world. If you want to go back to listen to Series 1 of the Endurance Podcast, that was all recorded remotely. And what Martin and I are absolutely loving with Series 2 is we're always in the real world. You get a totally different level of conversation, and it's either shot at festivals and events. We were at Kendal Mountain Film Festival, and here we are in London, and there's plans for more this year, or on what we call epics. And epics are where we do a ride and then a record. And thus far, Mallorca, the north of Scotland, and Gran Canaria. So it's getting pretty lively here. I trust the microphones will isolate and you can hear as well. And for this episode, we're joined by Shaunna Burke Phd, who is an academic, an amazing adventurer, and I can't wait to have this conversation. We were connected recently through a mutual friend, Damien Benegas, the Benegas brothers, very famous climbers. Damien guided me up Aconcagua and Ojos del Salado. Damien kindly put us in touch a couple of months ago, and here we are. But before I bring you into the conversation, Shona, I'll maybe throw to Martin, because whilst I've been out around the show today, you guys have already had a chance to catch up.
Yeah, we just had a lovely coffee at my favourite coffee shop now. I'm the best customer just outside the Adventure Travel Show. They know me by name, they know what drink I want and everything. It's amazing. Yeah, so Shona, I'll start with asking, so you're from Canada, you're living in Leeds. What brought you to the best city in England?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you both for having me on your show. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I actually came over to the United Kingdom for work. So I completed my postdoc at McGill University in Canada and was looking for full-time employment. And my search brought me to the UK. And I applied for a position at the University of Leeds and was successful. And I originally came over on a 2-year contract, expecting to go home back to Canada after that, but I'm still here. That was in 2011, and it's 2026, and I'm still in the UK, and I'm loving it.
Fantastic. And your background is psychology, which they later evolved into sports psychology, particularly interesting for the challenges I've been doing, and Mark's now joining me on for next year. Can you give us a little bit of background on the journey that's brought you into sports psychology and some of the journeys on the way, how you've got here and where you are today?
Yeah, so I actually grew up as a downhill ski racer. So from a very young age, I actually left home at the age of 14 to attend a ski academy where I skied 4 days a week and went to school 3 days a week. And
you skied 4 days a week and went to school 3 days a week?
Yeah, skied 4 days a week and went to school 3 days a week.
Wow.
It was a dream as a youngster.
Yeah, good priorities. I like that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sport comes
You're speaking
first.
to somebody who didn't go to school until high school. So, I mean, I was homeschooled. So I as much time in the outdoors as possible. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a dream actually for me because alpine skiing was my passion. So. And from there, I went on to compete at an elite level. So I represented Canada internationally at a number of events. And from there, I went on to accept a scholarship in the United States of America at Sierra Nevada College. And throughout my skiing career, I was one of those athletes that never reached their potential. I would be successful, and I would beat all of my peers in training races, but then when it came to the actual competition time, I wouldn't perform to my ability. And at the time, sports psychology wasn't commonplace, and my coaches were racking their brains. They couldn't understand why was it that somebody did so well in training, but then got to the performance where it mattered and couldn't reach their potential. And that's what triggered or ignited my passion for understanding the human mind and how people can perform consistently at a high level and what it takes from that psychological perspective to be able to do that.
That makes a lot of sense with hindsight, but what did it actually feel like when you were an athlete at that level, not able to turn it on race day? And how do you then go from trying to figure out your best to then studying it? Because as you say, it wasn't a well-defined academic discipline at the time. You've kind of got to see it to become it. And how did you switch from being a ski racer to then the studies that you've gone on to do? I'm fascinated with that switch, because a lot of people would just sort of say, I'm not cut out for this, and go and do something completely different. But you took the bit which you saw as a massive challenge in your athletic career and turned it into your profession, which is fascinating, because a lot of people could have just said, I can't do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, the curiosity and how the mind works was so strong. And the transition occurred when my skiing career ended. I was looking for the next physical challenge. And after my undergrad, which I did in psychology at McGill University, I took 6 months off to travel around the world. And I found myself in Nepal, in the Himalayas. I did the Annapurna circuit and then went on to do the famous trek to Everest Base Camp. And it was on that particular trek to base camp where the seed to climb Everest was planted. And when I went home back to Canada, I was about to start my master's degree in sports psychology, and I had to choose my thesis topic. And my actual degree was in sports psychology, but I wanted my thesis to be focused on the psychology of high altitude mountaineers, and particularly I looked at the mental strategies of elite Mount Everest climbers to try to learn what mental strategies are used by climbers to overcome obstacles, and how do they succeed in a very difficult and taxing environment.
And that sounds like a lot more than we could fit into a single podcast, but can you give me an exact summary? So you were then studying and doing a master's thesis on psychology of high altitude climbing, and I guess researching with those who were climbing Everest or mountains, 8,000 meter peaks. Were there any easy? I mean, that's a huge amount of work and research, but are there any big points? I guess, in the context of what we're talking about today, endurance, coping mechanisms, the want to push yourself to these environments, was there anything that really surprised you during that study?
I suppose there were a number of things that stood out. I think the most obvious was the importance of resilience and the mindset of being mentally tough. And how do you, as an elite climber, how do you put up with discomfort? How do you manage discomfort in order to be able to continue putting one foot in front of the other? If you can imagine on mountains like Everest, there is a lot of discomfort that you have to endure, all the way from the psychological discomfort of how do you manage fear of death and dying. You know, you're in an environment where you're putting your life at risk, in an environment where an avalanche could happen at any point in time, where you could fall into a crevasse, you could suffer from high altitude sickness, whether that be cerebral or pulmonary edema. So I was really curious into understanding how do mountaineers manage that discomfort psychologically of what they have to deal with, but then also physically, the discomfort where your body is under duress for a protracted period of time. When I climbed Everest in 2005, it took 2 months from the time I left home to returning home. So your body is actually under duress for an extended period of time where it's breaking down. Muscles atrophy, you have difficulty sleeping, difficulty eating. And so it's about how much discomfort can you endure to be able to be successful. And resilience really stood out as being one of the number one psychological strategies that are needed to be able to be successful.
And how do you measure that? If you benchmark as yourself, you know how you feel, you know how your own mind and your own body's feeling in reaction to the endurance and what you're putting yourself through. How do you measure that across a broader spectrum of different people? How do you understand how they're feeling in comparison to how you felt, and how that's as a reaction to what they've been doing? What's the benchmarks, and how do you gauge it?
Really, the type of piece of research that I did was very much exploratory, in that it was understanding people's perceptions of how they endure discomfort. And so very much it was by a case-by-case base in terms of understanding how they manage their own discomforts and what they did to do that. So the key tips for mountaineers in terms of managing discomfort is about association. You see in the literature there's disassociation, where you distance yourself, or you try to distance yourself from the discomfort that you're going through, or there's association, where you embrace it. And to be successful in the mountains, it's really critical to embrace the discomfort that you're going through.
That's what I was wondering. Was this research just about figuring out what traits were important, or was it actually trying to figure out the toolkit that gives you those traits? Because you could say with a population, well, they're more successful than them because they've got more resilience, but that's not helpful in and of itself unless you know what you need to do differently to become resilient. So I'm interested to know, because it might be blindingly obvious to say you need to be resilient to climb a big mountain, but then I guess that's separating it from the technical skill sets. Lots of people would know how to clip on, clip off, or safely operate crampons or whatever it is, but that's a very different thing than if the same thing happens to two people, how they think, how they communicate, and how they operate in exactly the same situation. And that's the bit for me, I guess, for anyone watching or listening, they're going, well, yeah, that's great to know, but how do I get that? And so that's really interesting. Like, you've got to own it. You've got to fully embrace the situation you're in, as opposed to distracting yourself from the reality.
Absolutely. I think discomfort is very much when you're enduring it for such a long period of time. It's really about how you frame discomfort in your mind. And I think in life we can be challenged in many different ways. And if we take physical discomfort as one example, we can either see the discomfort as a threat and try and shy away from it, or we can see it as an opportunity to challenge ourselves and to push ourselves. And it's how we frame it in our minds that then determines, if we're successful.
And did you come across any kind of common traits between what you'd maybe put into two categories of what you just spoke about? People who see the discomfort and feel the discomfort and don't like it, maybe, versus the ones who embrace it and push it harder. Was there any kind of common traits between them two groups, or was it random, or did you research that in any detail?
We didn't do a comparison for this particular study, so it was more done broadly speaking, just looking at the research was climbers who were successful on Everest, so those who had reached the summit, so they had a certain level of experience going in, and what we found were commonalities across all of the climbers in terms of how they went about managing the discomfort that they were going through. But it was more that than it was less about a comparison between two groups.
Something that I find very interesting on any journey, and that could be a physical journey, it could be a health journey, it could be whatever, is that sort of idea of what you're aiming for versus what you actually need to do every day, maybe the behaviors versus the results. And Everest is such an easy thing for people to visualize, isn't it? Like climbing the highest mountain in the world. I think a lot of people would say, I want that prize. I'd love to be able to do that. But that's maybe very different than the lived reality of climbing the mountain. So I don't know, is it interesting to sort of think about that resilience trait in the context of what's actually motivating you? I mean, it's very easy to be motivated by the accolade, the reflective glory, the fact that you did something which everyone's going to talk about, but how manifests itself in all the stuff that people never get to see always fascinates me. People often say to me, I understand what you did because I read the book, and I'm like, that's the best version of what I did in a way that I could capture and share with the world, but you can't possibly, share all of that, and that intrinsic motivation is a very different thing than, I guess, how the world sees you. So I'm always fascinated that very psychological motivation. What motivates you and why, and the fact that changes. Because, as you go on with any big project, you might be sort of fixated on something, and then you get there and actually your framing of it completely changes. I don't have the language for it because I'm not a psychologist, but you've studied this as an academic, but you've also lived it through doing expeditions. So I'm fascinated how you think about these things, because for you it's not just about sort of thinking about it, it's actually living it. It's going out there and taking on these challenges.
Yeah, you raise a number of really good points, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you say the word intrinsic motivation. So one of the studies that I did actually did a comparison, and we did a comparison with novice mountaineers on Everest and elite mountaineers. And we found distinct differences between the two groups. So the novice mountaineers were very much driven by reaching the summit, by outcomes, by recognition, by developing certain skills. Whereas the elite mountaineers were actually driven by factors that were internal to who they are. So they were very much driven by their passion for mountaineering itself and how they felt in the mountains and what that did to them as a result of just their feelings. And I think for me as a mountaineer, my first time reaching the summit of Everest, I was 29, and I will be going back this year to try to attempt the summit again. My motivation when I was 29, it actually was performance orientated. As much as mountaineering is my passion. When I'm in the mountains, I feel alive. There's no other place I want to be. But at the same time, when I was 29, it was about getting to the summit. For me, going back this year, the motivation has slightly shifted. And I think for me, when we think about the endurance mindset, I think for me, it's very much more than distance. It's more than reaching the summit. It's about me as a person and what I can do on the mountain and being capable of doing it despite the uncertainties and the difficulties and the challenges that go along with the pursuit itself. It's the process for me. It's wanting to be in the mountains, and it's wanting to just live in the mountains and have that experience.
What do you think? What do you think motivates you, Martin?
To ride my bike on incredibly long distances.
Martin's been on this mission Martin's got a really interesting background in sport, but it's not in cycling. And then in recent years, you found the bike, and your hunger to push mileage and do the physical aspect of it, but also through doing that, benefit charities and the business that you're part of in the communities. I see your sort of interest in twofold. You've sort of taken something that was clearly already inside you and you've channeled it into endurance bike riding, and you're still figuring out where that can go. But it's great. I've joined you on that journey, but I'm always fascinated in terms of how you see that motivation.
I wasn't really prepared for that question, if I'm honest.
Good. That's like...
I've had a kind of passion for pushing myself for a lot of years, really, but I've only really opened this chapter in the last couple of years, as you know, particularly on the bike because of a knee injury, which stopped me running, stopped me walking for a little while, stopped me doing martial arts, which I loved and have done for a long time. And I got back on the bike probably 6 months, a mountain bike initially, 6 months after I had the injury, because my physio told me so. I didn't think I could, but then it was painful to begin, and it quickly just redeveloped and became a feeling. I guess I got a bit addicted to again because I couldn't run, I couldn't do a lot of other things. My knee still felt really funny doing certain things, but the bike, I could feel a kind of funniness in my calf and down the back of my leg, but it wasn't painful. So it was the one thing I could really push quite hard, along with going to the gym and rehabilitation. I could push it quite hard. So I guess I think it's probably a combination with how my brain's built in terms of obsessiveness. It became a bit of an obsession that I wanted to just keep pushing and pushing further, and it got longer and longer and longer, and I just found I really loved it. It's not just the exercise, it's the fresh air, it's getting out of the scenery, it's not being sat in a car. I really started to hate driving at a point over the last couple of years, and it just like moved me away from an obsessiveness around work in a way, to get a completely different balance, I think. So now I've just got more things to be obsessed about, I guess.
It is. I mean, it's interesting. Like, it's what we're talking about: climbing mountains, riding bikes. Shows up in sort of physical journeys, but it does start with sort of thoughts, identity, motivation, how you want to show up in the world. And for you, I can see that it's sort of that inner drive. Yes, it manifests itself in all the other stuff you get to do with it, the people you work with, the charities that benefit, and all the rest of it. But at the heart of it is just Martin, who wants to figure out how good you can be at riding the bike. And I mean, that's a really deep-rooted thing. And I can see that you've channeled that at different points in your life and in different things. And I often think, that could be music, it could be art, it could be climbing mountains. It doesn't really matter. It's just sort of like, it's just an expression of who you are. And I guess the bit that I'm interested in is how much you are doing that for yourself. Would you do it if the world never knew? Or are you doing it because the world cares? And clearly I've done these things professionally, and you're constantly juggling with that. Who cares? Why do they care? How do you make this work? It's fascinating. You're rocking a pink shirt. You've got the charity logo on. I won't spoil it for you. What's the name of the project that you're taking on this year?
Yeah, so this year the project is Dying to Climb.
Okay, so give some context to your project.
Yeah, so in 2004, in March, I was diagnosed with stage 4 incurable breast cancer. And I went through 4.5 months of chemotherapy, followed by a double mastectomy and lymph node clearance. Then I went on to have liver surgery, followed by 3 weeks of radiotherapy. I then discovered that I'm carrying the BRCA2 gene, so a genetic mutation. So I opted to have my ovaries removed. And then about a month before, I actually went back to the Himalayas just after having my ovaries removed to run the Everest Marathon and to climb a 6,000 meter peak, Leboche East. But a month before doing that, I found out one of the tumors on my liver reappeared. And so in August of this year, I had ablation therapy on my liver. So I've been undergoing 18 months of aggressive treatments. And I'm currently now on maintenance therapy, but continuing to exercise and to live a full and meaningful life is really, really important to me, which is why in March of this year, I'll be returning to the Himalayas to attempt the summit of Everest 20 years later after doing it back in 2005.
Phenomenal.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
The Endurance Podcast is brought to you in partnership with Enjoy Travel. Huge thanks for all that they do. And I don't need to introduce my co-host, but over to Martin Mantle to explain Enjoy Travel.
So Enjoy Travel brings you car hire, hotels, airport parking lounges with a loyalty platform, meaning you buy 9, you get your 10th free. And you can mix and match across any range of our products. You don't need to just buy 10 car hire, you could buy a hotel, a car hire. And we're giving you a special discount code to celebrate our podcast, which is RID3R, as in rider, and you'll get up to 30% off everything.
So click on Enjoy Travel. It's been amazing for these epics, makes our travel so much more enjoyable and seamless. So thanks Martin, thanks Enjoy Travel.
Yeah, so as we were talking about before, when we went for a coffee, and I was really enjoying that conversation, and we had to stop it because we were a minute late to get here because we
had to start recording.
So deep in our discussion. And it's absolutely fascinating to me, and I'm sure to many of the listeners, that you're kind of experimenting with your own body in relation to illness or in relation to the cancer that you've got or the tumours that you've got, the impact that is going to have at the altitude. My only benchmark, which I'm not trying to compare for a second in any way whatsoever, because it's not comparable. I fell off a quad bike last year, two or 3 weeks before the challenge Leeds to Nice, and my ribs were all smashed up and really painful. And my physio, Matt, who's an amazing guy on our support team, he had me go into the compression chambers in Leeds, which are there primarily for multiple sclerosis, but they're also open if you make a donation for just general use. And it's a compression chamber that changes the air to try and stimulate the red blood vessels, the red blood cells, sorry, to make your wounds heal faster, or make your whatever injury you've got heal faster. I've no idea if it works. I did it a few times. So yeah, again, not trying to compare that in any way whatsoever, because it's completely different. But that's my only kind of benchmark in how can you use altitude, and what's the impact going to be on your body with something clearly significantly more serious, and how's that going to, what's the research, and how's that going to lead to something? What are you expecting to happen?
Yeah, no, it's a very good comparison, actually. So just to give you a little bit of background, so I'm going to be using the climb as a platform to raise awareness of incurable cancer and to try to help with the stigma that's associated with incurable cancer, and to try to change that. But in addition, I'll be raising money for cancer charities, so particularly for Macmillan. Obviously, I'll be trying to inspire other people who are living with a life-limiting illness. But alongside that, I'm going to be conducting research before I go to the mountain, but also on the mountain. And this research will be conducted on myself. So I'm currently working with a team of researchers at Leeds Beckett University, and I'm using their high-altitude chamber. And I'll be using that as a way to prepare myself so that when I get to the mountain, I'm really, really well acclimatized, and I'm ready to hit the ground running when I'm there. But we're also going to be doing physiological measurements in the chamber. So we're going to be looking at how a high altitude and having that low oxygen, what is that doing to my immune function? Which is one sort of concern when you do have cancer, is looking at your immune function and what is the impact on red blood cells, white blood cells. So we're going to be doing a number of different measurements to see what is happening to my body physiologically while I'm in the chamber doing my testing. And then we're going to continue those same tests when I'm on the mountain. So I'll be doing a acclimatization training peak before climbing Everest called Mara Peak, which is 6,400 meters. We'll be doing tests on that mountain and then continuing them as well on Everest itself. So I'll be using myself as a guinea pig to see what is happening to certain cancer markers, as well as to my immune function, and physiologically how am I responding.
And how do you do those tests? When you're, I understand obviously at Beckett you've got all the machinery, the equipment, everything. So how do you do that in a mountain? Will you be taking equipment with you? What are they doing and looking for?
I'll be taking some equipment with me. Yeah, it obviously is quite difficult if you can imagine an extreme environment with temperature. There's a certain number of things we have to take into consideration, but there's things like a pulse oximeter that I can put on my finger to measure oxygen saturation, to measure also my heart rate. I'll also be measuring heart rate variability when I'm there. So there are a certain number of things that we can do. There's certain cognitive tests that we can do as well to see how I'm doing cognitively in altitude, because cognitive decline is common in high altitude as well. So at 8,000 meters, it's quite common for climbers to experience hallucinations where they see phantom companions, or they might hear orchestras. And I have to say, it did happen to me in 2005. So cognitively, we're also interested to see, what is happening in high altitude, and how will I perform cognitively in the chamber, but then also on the mountain. So we'll be gathering a lot of data while I'm there, which I hope will be useful for other people as well. As one of the first people women with incurable cancer to climb Everest, there's very little data out there about what happens to the body. So it'll be interesting.
I guess it's quite hard to have liquid samples, whether that's saliva samples or blood samples, because, you're in conditions where it would be hard to bring that back. But that would be quite interesting, wouldn't it? Your cortisol, red blood count, white blood count. I mean, it would be really interesting. So much of that changes at altitude anyway. If you're going through cancer treatment, that sort of layers on a whole load more in terms of, it's hard to get a data set as well because you're, a subject of one, but it's going to be fascinating. I'm quite interested in the fact that with the filming project that you're with Damien Benegas, there's the inspiration part, giving people the quiet confidence to go out there and take on dreams and projects, even if they've got life-limiting illnesses. And that's very much in line with Sir Chris Hoy's project with his Tour de Four, trying to get people to reframe time and think about, but yours is going a step further than that. It's one thing to talk about sort of inspiration and the great outdoors. You're actually taking your sort of academic rigor to this and going, can I learn something that's genuinely useful in this space? I've heard you talk about sort of the prehabilitation and actually the health benefits from being active whilst going through cancer treatments, and then climbing Everest. What's that then doing to your well-being during that period and afterwards? It's one thing, I think if you were just to shoot a film saying, I'm going to go back to Everest and try and climb it again 20 years later after being diagnosed with cancer and all the treatment that you've been through, would be inspiring in and of itself. But the layer deeper, which is actually physiologically, is there something we can learn here by taking ourselves to that space with cancer? I've not heard of that before. I don't know, are there many comparisons? Are there other climbers who have tried similar things?
I don't know of any, and I think what I'm doing is I basically, when I got my diagnosis, I approached my treatment like I was climbing the hardest climb of my life. And I did that by drawing on my background as a scientist, so using the mindset of a scientist combined with the mindset of an athlete. So to give you an example, the day I got my diagnosis, I went home and I designed my own prehabilitation plan. So my area of expertise is prehabilitation. So how do we prepare cancer patients to be fit, both physically but also psychologically ready, so that they can withstand and endure the treatments that they're about to face? And the research shows that the more prepared you are physically and psychologically, the quicker you're going to recover. And it also means that your decline, because going through treatment, you will physiologically, there will be a decline, but you won't decline as much if you are prepared both physically and psychologically. So I approached my treatment by developing my own prehabilitation plan, which involved 5 pillars. So it obviously involved the physical pillar, which was ensuring that I maintained my exercise throughout my treatment. So what I would do is I would run to my chemotherapy sessions, I would have my infusion, and then I would walk home. I did that for 4.5 months.
Hang on, just pause on that. You ran to your treatments. Okay.
Yeah, so the treatment, I was very fortunate, was about 3 miles from my house. So I ran from my house to the treatment center. It was the chemo bus where I was receiving my treatments, had my infusion, and then I would walk home.
And just to pause on that, were you doing that because you felt it would help the physical outcomes and adaptation from the treatment, or did you do it to mentally give yourself something positive to focus on? Or I don't think you're the sort of person that distracts themselves, but gives another thing that day that's sort of a counterpoint to the treatment. Was this because you thought you were helping the sort of physical side of what you were doing and you were interested to see if that would help with the treatment, or it was just something positive you could do in the face of the treatment?
So there were a multitude of reasons why I did it. I had my primary reason, and then I had my secondary reasons. My primary reason, every single thing I did the moment I got my diagnosis, was to ensure my treatment would be as effective as it possibly could be. So the latest research that's coming out, it's very preliminary, it's early stages, but it is showing that if you exercise immediately before your chemotherapy or your radiotherapy, your treatment will actually be more effective. And there are a number of reasons why that is, but if you can imagine what exercise does to the body in terms of oxygenation to the tumors, in terms of just the chemotherapy, pumping it through the system. So I drew on that evidence base, which is why I did the exercise immediately before having my chemo. I parked my car 3 miles away from the hospital for my radiotherapy, ran 3 miles, had my radiotherapy, and then ran home. So I did it, that was my primary purpose. Secondary reason was to hold on to my identity as an athlete. It was something I was determined that I wouldn't lose. And so I would turn up in my appointments in my running gear, in my running shoes, and I felt confident, this is who I am. And everybody else in the waiting room looked different to me, and it was who I am, and so that's why I did it. But it also gave me a mental boost as well.
What did the doctors say? What did the other inpatients say?
They all looked at me wondering, who is this person walking through the doors. I remember my surgeon looking at me saying, you ran here, it's very windy outside and you're running back. I think they were all perplexed. I think I challenged what a typical patient, I guess, would be like. And so I challenged my healthcare team.
And do you think could you make any from, I guess your research was only on yourself, or have you expanded that somehow? Is there any, again, benchmark you say, I think I've probably improved it by 40%, let's say, or 20%, or is it just, in general, I think it improves it because of how I felt? Or is there anything more scientific? Is there any plan, or have you already opened that research up to any sample of other people to test, here's a group who've got this particular illness and having this treatment, let's get half of them to jog there or do some sport or do whatever, and get half of them just to sit on the sofa and get a taxi? And is there any measure, the control, the A versus the B, on in general, did it improve them by 40% or 20%, or is it just yourself?
So there's a large evidence base in prehabilitation that actually shows that there are benefits for cancer patients engaging in exercise on a number of levels. So to give you a few examples, we know that through the literature, if you exercise regularly throughout your treatment, your fatigue levels won't be as high as they normally would be. So it helps with fatigue, it helps with functional mobility, it helps with managing pain. It also helps psychologically with lowering anxiety. It helps with symptoms of depression. So from the symptom standpoint, the evidence base is actually quite strong. We also know in breast cancer that you will reduce your chance of recurrence by 50% if you continue to engage in regular exercise throughout treatment and beyond. The evidence is really growing in this space.
Just pause there. You'll increase, so in breast cancer, you'll reduce the chance by 50% of it coming back again.
Correct.
That's incredible.
And
Wow.
and I guess going back to your original studies, going right back to the start of the conversation, once you stopped being a ski racer, you must be fascinated in the psychological aspect of this, which is just the coping mechanism. I mean, we're here on the Endurance podcast. A lot of the listeners and viewers will not be going through life-changing disease diagnosis. They'll be making sense of this conversation within their own struggles, but those struggles won't necessarily be health-related, albeit we all know people who have had significant diagnosis, whether it's cancer, MND, or others. The psychological bit, which goes back to your very first bit of training, must be massive, which is how you physically manifest is clearly connected with your ability to cope. And that's a bit glib, isn't it? But you said the word depression. Clearly how you wake up and show up fundamentally changes your ability to physically adapt to treatments and whatnot. So as I say, for people listening or watching this who are applying these sort of lessons to much sort of broader, you could say exactly the same. You don't need to have a cancer diagnosis to realize that this all starts with the way you think about the struggle, however you define that struggle. And I love that. So that word that you've introduced to me, the prehabilitation, how you sort of show up for the things that you do, as opposed to just, well, I went through my training, I've got the technical skill sets. That is a much broader and more interesting definition. I love that. We've not explored that on endurance, and I think that's incredibly powerful. With the mission that you've got this year in terms of going back to Everest, there's a very specific focus, and it strikes me that you want to know everything. You want to be in charge of the detail here. Is there a risk that you know too much? Is it like a doctor who suddenly gets a physical issue themselves? They're like, I almost didn't need to know that myself, because it would almost be better if somebody else was the expert and I was just the patient. Do you ever sit there and go, I know too much here because I've spent my life focused on every aspect of this, the psychology, the high altitude mountaineering, the cancer care, every aspect of this you have studied, you know the detail on. And do you ever sit there and go, well, this is great, I'm an academic and I'm an expert at all these things, but occasionally it'd be nice if somebody else was the expert on my situation rather than me trying to be the expert on myself?
Yeah, it's really, really, really interesting point you make. I think, having worked 17 years with cancer patients and worked with multidisciplinary care teams, I do have a lot of knowledge on my fingertips. And when I got my diagnosis, when you think about, I'm going to put this in the context of mountaineering, but I'm also going to put this in the context of a cancer diagnosis. Adapting to change is something that is paramount. And I can give you a number of stories on Everest where I had to adapt to change. But when you think about the cancer journey, there were a number of changes that I had to go through when I was diagnosed. Short-term plans have to be put on hold. Long-term plans that stretch way out into the future become very, very uncertain. Changes with my body, losing both my breasts. So change becomes paramount in terms of how you manage it. But what was the most difficult change for me with my diagnosis was being on the other side. So I had never been in a hospital before. In terms of medication, I'd only ever taken antibiotics. So for me, being on the other side and learning how to be a patient and adapting to that was the hardest. But what made it easier for me was that I did have a lot of knowledge on my fingertips, but it was a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Because I knew the statistics, for example, in terms of, survival rates. I had all that on my fingertips. Some of my research is actually working in palliative care. So I've spent quite a bit of time in hospice settings where people are at end of life. And I remember the word palliative being used in one of my appointments. And I remember at the time my understanding of a palliative patient was frailty, dependency, immobility. I thought, that's not me. That is 100% not me. And so knowing that was difficult, but at the same time, having the knowledge on my fingertips in terms of what I needed to do was very helpful. So it was a double-edged sword.
I guess it gave you a completely different, empathy's the wrong word, but if you spend 17 years on the academic side, but also working with people going through cancer treatment, when you are suddenly going through treatment yourself, it doesn't matter how much you've worked with other people, for you to then be the patient, it's that level of empathy is very hard to get your head around until you're there. And I can't imagine that, but I can imagine for you, that level of information where suddenly you are going through what you have helped other people go through, it must be an extraordinary switch. And the thing which fascinates me about your journey is, yes, it's about the psychology, but so much of what you do is the physicality, that interface between, well-being in the broadest sense of the word, how you think about it, but also your physical well-being. To healthy's a clumsy word, but to be as healthy as you can in the situation you find yourself in. And let's focus back on Everest. It's an environment where the human body does not thrive. When we take ourselves to, he says grandly, I've only ever been to 7K up. Once you go to 8,000 meters up or higher,
the human body is in a state of sort of steady decline anyway. It's not a healthy place to be. Yes, it's inspiring to take yourself back to Everest. I am absolutely fascinated, as I'm sure you are, as to how it feels compared to your 29-year-old self to be back on that mountain. I don't know if you can share how you're thinking about it and how you're trying to adapt to what that's the stress of what that's going to be like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've thought about that a lot, actually, and I think on a number of levels the experience is going to be very different because the mountain has changed. So when I climbed the mountain in 2005, we didn't have the same level of overcrowding as you see today on the mountain. In terms of the actual infrastructure that's available to climbers, we didn't have the same level of infrastructure. You now see on Everest there are a lot more luxuries that are at people's fingertips to be able to help them on the mountain to succeed. I think on one level I'm going to find that quite difficult. I am much more a purist and prefer the traditional way of climbing, where you go into mountains that are remote and where you do it as you're self-sustained as much as possible. So I think on that standpoint, the way the mountain has changed, I'm going to find that quite difficult. But I think from my own self, in terms of my level of endurance, I think, and my ability psychologically, I think I'm stronger psychologically than I was when I was 29. I've been through a lot more since being 29, so I have a lot more hardships that I can draw on to help me overcome some of the obstacles that I will face on the mountain. I think I've experienced a lot of pain and discomfort, both in the mountains, but then also through my cancer journey. And I'll be able to draw on that when I'm in the mountains. So I think that's going to be quite helpful. I'm hoping I'm a bit wiser now that I'm 50. Yeah, so I think there'll be pros and cons. But let's watch this space and see what it's like.
How could you imagine, so the research you're going to do on yourself, your experiment, if you like, that you're about to do on yourself, to see how your cells and your body and everything reacts, and how the cancer reacts, and how the tumour reacts, how could you see that benefiting for the better treatments and curability, if that's the word?
Are we going to send everyone up Everest? That's probably not.
Yeah,
that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, but I mean, seriously, though, how could you see that benefiting in the future? Could you imagine that there's eventually a chart, although it'll never be the exact same for everybody? Could you imagine eventually there's like some straight line or curved graph or scatter chart that says you do this much exercise, you reduce your chance by this much, you do this much, you improve your recovery. Could you imagine some chart, or is it just, where do you see the outcome of it?
I think because if we talk about sample sizes in research, the number of participants that you have in a study, the higher number, the better. This is going to be a case study where it's basically the study's being done just on me. I don't think we're going to learn a massive amount at this stage, but I see it as a stepping stone.
Okay.
I see it as, I'm hoping we'll gain some insight, but again, because it's just being done on myself, scientifically, it's only a starting point into what may potentially grow into some line of research. But I know there are researchers now who are looking at how cells operate in low oxygen environments. So there are some work that is going on in that space. So hopefully, I might be able to add a little bit of knowledge to that existing body.
And what do you expect the outcomes to be for you on your cells and the results? Do you think it's going to give a conclusion of something helps something else and is worth then investigating in more detail with a bigger sample of people somehow?
It's difficult to say at this stage. I'm not quite certain what we're going to find, but I'm open to doing all the tests that we possibly can. I think if we had a larger amount of funding behind it, we could do a lot more, like blood samples. Unfortunately for this study, we don't have the funding to be able to do some of the tests that maybe would be more informative, but at least we can do some physiological, psychological measures that hopefully will give some insight. But regardless, going to Everest and being at 8,000 meters and higher is going to be very taxing on the body, no matter what. So,
and as a scientist, you must always be, because you're a scientist where you are the subject, it must be very hard to, A, not have a strong hypothesis, but also not to have an optimism bias, because it's not like you're tasking somebody else to go and do this. You know, it's fundamental to your outcome as well. I guess my question is a really obvious one. How important is it to get to the top?
Yeah, so for me, the summit is important. Personally, obviously, I would like to see myself on the summit, but it isn't everything. I think for me, particularly through the cancer journey, I am learning that it's about the experience in life. That's the most important thing. And I think just starting this journey, the preparation going into it, just being on the mountain, just being surrounded by other people who are going after life and living their dreams, that's what's the most important to me. So I think for me, it's it's less about reaching the summit. It's more about being able to inspire other people, to be able to just live life. And I'm so grateful that I am able to continue to have these experiences. And whatever the outcome is, I'm giving it a crack.
Well, whatever the outcome is, can I invite you back to the Endurance Podcast to tell us what that experience was like? We are actually planning to do one of our epics in Yorkshire, so we can maybe meet you closer to home if that. But I'm so fascinated, not just where you've come from throughout your career, but what you're doing right now. I mean, it's such a simple thing for people to understand, you know, summiting Everest. But in the context of your cancer diagnosis and treatment, the fact that, yes, of course, at the top level it's inspiring, but as a scientist, it's also really, really interesting from a psychological and physiological perspective. And you're our second guest today who has climbed Everest, but you've spoken about that same mountain in a completely different way because of your own journey and what's motivating you to go back. It's pretty humbling. It's pretty awesome. Every conversation we're having for the Endurance Podcast series is in the context of our own crazy challenge this summer, going 6,000 kilometers to break a record across Europe with Jenny Graham and Hamish. And it's going to be really, really cool to take a group of people to try and do something which, you know, Martin, for you is stepping massively into the unknown. What I'm taking from this conversation again is also like properly writing it down, capturing that journey in a way that you sort of really remember how you saw it before, what it was like during, afterwards, and then making sense of it for a wider audience as well. The fact that you're teaming up with Damien to make a film about this as well, you know, it's the personal journey, but it's also the journey that you share, which is what we're trying to do with the Endurance Podcast series, and trying to make sense of those things so that viewers and listeners can go away and go, wow, I'm not climbing Everest or going through cancer treatment, or I'm never going to race the length of Europe, but hopefully the things that we're talking about are genuinely helpful in a way which allows people to get out there and push their ambitions. I don't know if there's any final thoughts that you want to pick up on, Martin.
I love the concept you just mentioned of having a follow-up endurance podcast after you've done it to discuss it and talk about it, and that would be fascinating. And yeah, it would tie in really well, because we're hopefully going to do a Yorkshire epic or a Yorkshire chapter, and get some local Yorkshire people. Even though you're from Canada, you've lived in Yorkshire now for
an honorary Yorkshire.
many years. An honorary Yorkshire, yeah, exactly.
Is there?
I love that. Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
It's been a really original conversation on the Endurance Podcast series. Thank you so much for coming to London to join us. Are there any topics that you hope to cover that we've not? Is there anything that you'd like to shout out at this point which gives people the opportunity to follow your Everest mission this year?
Yeah, I suppose there's a couple of things, just to wrap up with one last message. And I think for me, very much, you know, none of us know what's around the corner in life. And I think, you know, when anything in life can bring challenges, and I think it's not what the challenge is, it's how we react to those challenges. And I think very much the documentary that we're going to be filming is very much about that. So, you know, I do have a website, which is dyingtoclimb.com, which highlights and showcases what the documentary is going to be about, what the expedition is going to be about, and a Just Giving page as well to raise money for Macmillan Cancer Support. So, and just want to say thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. Want to wish you all the best on your adventure as well. It sounds super exciting, and I'll be following it with interest.
It is exciting. So you're going to be away. What's your timelines? I realise people will be watching, listening to this into the future, but when are you away to Nepal?
So it's this spring, April and May.
April and May. And we'll rush to get this podcast out as soon as possible because there's still the opportunity to get involved in your project if people want to, right?
That's correct, yeah.
And what's the website?
Dying to Climb.
Dying to Climb. Well, yeah, on behalf of Martin and myself, I mean, it's been an absolute privilege to have you on. Shaunna, thank you for coming to London and sharing what you're up to. I'm so glad that Damien Benegas put us in touch, and it goes without saying, anything we can do to support your amazing adventure, I would love to do that. But first and foremost, hopefully everyone listening to this and watching it at home has enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Well, hopefully you all enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Shaunna Burke as much as I did. And Martin, I mean, what an original conversation, what an inspiration. The topic of endurance clearly is so broad because endurance is what you make of it. But I'd love to hear viewers and listeners' thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Shaunna, for joining us. If you enjoyed that, which hopefully you did as much as we did, please don't forget to leave a comment, press the like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe. Press the button.